The desert sun hung low, painting the cracked asphalt of Route 17 in shades of rust and gold, as if the highway itself were bleeding out from old wounds. Dust devils swirled lazily in the distance, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and engine oil. It was the kind of afternoon where the heat shimmered like a mirage, distorting the horizon, and every shadow seemed to whisper secrets long buried. In the roadside diner called the Last Oasis, tucked between forgotten truck stops and endless dunes, a young girl named Lily sat alone at the counter, her small hands clutching a faded backpack. She was no more than 12, with wide eyes shadowed by exhaustion and a bruise blooming faintly on her cheek, vestiges of a life that had turned cruel without warning. The diner's bell jingled as the door swung open, but Lily didn't look up. She was staring at the mechanic's hands across the counter, where he wiped grease from his knuckles with a rag that had seen better days. He was a burly man in his 40s, name tag reading Carl, his forearms inked with a tattoo that caught the light, a coiled serpent devouring its own tail, the symbol of an endless cycle. It wasn't the ink itself that made her stomach twist. It was the way his fingers lingered too long on the toolbox beside her stool, the subtle glance he shot toward the parking lot, where a lone motorcycle rumbled to a stop outside. Lily's heart pounded. She'd seen that tattoo before, in fleeting nightmares from a town she'd fled, a mark worn by men who promised safety but delivered chains. Outside, the roar of the engine cut off abruptly, replaced by the heavy thud of boots on gravel. The biker, Ethan Hale, swung his leg over the weathered Harley, its chrome fenders dulled by miles of unforgiving road. Ethan was a man forged in fire, broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper beard framing a face etched by scars that told stories he never shared. His leather vest bore the faded patch of the Iron Vow Riders, a club born from the ashes of old wars, where brothers swore oaths that outlasted bullets and betrayals. He'd been riding alone for weeks, chasing ghosts from a promise made decades ago to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. The call had come at midnight 2 nights back, a cryptic message from an old contact about trouble brewing in these parts, but Ethan hadn't expected it to lead here, to this sun-baked speck on the map. He pushed through the door, the bell tinkling like a warning shot. The air inside was thick with the aroma of burnt coffee and frying onions, the ceiling fans whirring lazily overhead. Ethan's eyes scanned the room out of habit. A couple of truckers nursing beers in the corner, a waitress wiping down tables with mechanical efficiency, and the girl at the counter, her gaze flicking toward him with a mix of fear and desperate hope. Carl straightened behind the counter, his smile too wide, too practiced. "Afternoon, Ryder. Bike giving you trouble? I can take a look. Got a bay out back." Ethan nodded curtly, sliding onto a stool 2 seats from Lily. "Just a loose chain. Nothing major." His voice was gravelly, worn like the tires on his bike, but there was a steadiness to it, the kind that came from staring down worse than a desert breakdown. As he ordered a black coffee, Lily shifted, her backpack slipping slightly to reveal a crumpled photo tucked in the side pocket, a family snapshot, edges frayed, faces blurred by time. She stole another glance at Carl's hand, the serpent tattoo flexing as he poured Ethan's cup. It was the same mark from the men who'd taken her brother last year, vanishing him into the night with promises of protection that hid darker dealings. Whispers in her old town spoke of a network, smugglers, enforcers, who used remote spots like this to set traps for wanderers, luring them in with mechanical bait before the real ambush. The coffee steamed in Ethan's mug, its bitter scent cutting through the diner's haze. He sipped slowly, his mind drifting to the tattoo on his own wrist, a simple iron chain, inked after the war, symbolizing the unbreakable bonds of his chosen family. The Iron Vow Riders weren't outlaws. They were guardians, riding for those the system forgot. But lately, rumors had reached him of a shadow group preying on the vulnerable, using symbols like Carl's to mark their territory. Lily's eyes met his for a split second, pleading before she looked away, her small voice barely audible as she asked Carl for water. The mechanic's response was too quick, his hand brushing hers as he slid the glass over, possessive, lingering. Ethan's instincts prickled. He set the mug down, the porcelain clinking softly against the formica. "You okay, kid?" he asked Lily, his tone casual but eyes sharp. She froze, then whispered, "That tattoo, it's bad. He's not who he seems." Her words hung in the air like smoke, the first crack in the facade. Carl chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Kids say the darliest things. What's a little girl know about ink?" Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lot. Ethan felt the weight of his promise stirring, the one he'd made to a dying comrade years ago, to stand for the lost. Lily's warning wasn't just words, it was a spark, igniting the dry tinder of suspicion. As Carl excused himself to the back, muttering about tools, Ethan leaned closer to the girl. "Tell me everything," he said softly, the diner's hum fading into the background. Her story spilled out in hushed fragments. A brother gone, a town gripped by fear, and men with serpent tattoos who lured travelers into setups that ended in silence. No bodies, just echoes. The pieces clicked like a well-oiled engine. This wasn't a random stop. It was a web, and Ethan had ridden straight into it. But Lily's voice, trembling yet resolute, reminded him why he rode, not for glory, but for the quiet justice that mended broken oaths. He placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle as a father's touch. "You're safe now, I promise." As the first stars pricked the twilight sky, the distant rumble of more engines approached, his brothers sensing the call through the invisible threads of loyalty. The trap was set, but so was the counter. In the gathering dusk, with the scent of impending rain on the wind, Ethan knew this ride would test every scar, every secret, forging a new bond from the embers of the old. The diner's neon sign flickered to life outside, buzzing like a heartbeat. Lily clutched her backpack tighter, a flicker of hope breaking through her fear. Ethan stood, tossing a few bills on the counter, his mind already mapping the escape. Carl emerged from the back, wiping his hands, but the serpent on his skin seemed to writhe in the dim light. The confrontation loomed, not with fists, but with the unyielding truth of a promise kept. And in that moment, as the first drops of rain pattered against the window, the biker and the girl became unlikely allies, their paths entwining against the gathering storm. Rain lashed against the diner's windows like frantic fingers tapping a warning, turning the parking lot into a slick mirror of blurred neon. Ethan Hale's boots squelched on the linoleum as he guided Lily toward the door, his arm a steady shield around her shoulders. The girl's breath came in shallow bursts, her backpack slung over one arm like a lifeline. Carl's laughter echoed from behind the counter, sharp and hollow, but his eyes followed them like a predator sizing up prey. "Storm's picking up," he called out, voice laced with false concern. "You sure you don't want that chain fixed? Roads get treacherous out there." Ethan paused at the threshold, the door half open, letting in a gust of cool, ozone-scented air. His hand rested on the worn grip of his knife, tucked in his boot. Not for drawing blood, but for the quiet assurance it brought. "We'll manage," he replied, his tone even, like the low rumble of thunder rolling in from the east. Lily tugged at his sleeve, her whisper urgent. "He's calling them now." I heard the code in his laugh, the serpent's hiss. Ethan's jaw tightened. Years on the road had honed his ear for lies, and this one slithered like oil on water. They stepped into the downpour, the rain soaking through Ethan's leather vest in seconds, heavy drops tracing the lines of his scars like tears from the sky. His Harley waited under the flickering sign, its black frame gleaming wetly, engine still warm from the ride. Lily huddled close as he swung her onto the passenger seat, securing her backpack with a bungee cord from the saddlebag. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice cutting through the storm's roar. She nodded, small fingers gripping his waist, her trust a fragile bridge over the chasm of her fears. The engine snarled to life, a defiant growl against the wind, and Ethan gunned it out of the lot, tires spraying gravel and water in twin arcs. In the rearview mirror, shadows stirred. Two pickup trucks peeling from behind the diner, their headlights piercing the sheets of rain like accusatory eyes. Carl's setup was unfolding just as Lily had feared. A lure for lone riders, drawing them into ambushes where mechanical help turned to mechanical traps. Ethan knew the type. Whispers from his Iron Vow brothers had painted pictures of vanished travelers. Their bikes found stripped and empty, no traces of struggle, just the echo of broken promises. The highway stretched ahead, a ribbon of black swallowed by the night, flanked by jagged rock formations that loomed like silent sentinels. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the desert's vast emptiness, where sagebrush bent under the assault. Ethan's mind raced faster than the bike. Lily's story of her brother, snatched by men with the same serpent mark, gnawed at him. It mirrored his own ghosts, a war buddy lost to similar shadows, a vow sworn over a foxhole to shield the vulnerable from the world's underbelly. He'd buried that pain under miles of asphalt, but here it resurfaced, raw and insistent. The trucks gained, their engines bellowing like beasts in pursuit, high beams blinding in the mirrors. One veered close, bumping the Harley's rear wheel with a jolt that sent vibrations up Ethan's spine. Lily gasped, burying her face against his back. "They're the enforcers," she shouted over the wind. "They take people for the network, debts, secrets, whatever they want." Ethan's grip tightened on the handlebars, rain stinging his eyes. He couldn't outrun them forever. The storm was turning the road into a river, slick with deception. A curve loomed, the highway snaking around a sheer drop-off where the canyon yawned below, black and bottomless. Ethan downshifted, leaning into the turn, but the lead truck surged ahead, cutting them off with a screech of brakes. It skidded sideways, blocking the path. Doors flying open to reveal silhouettes in rain-slicked jackets. 4 men, faces obscured by hoods, the serpent tattoo flashing on one's exposed wrist. The second truck boxed them from behind, trapping the bike in a vice of steel and intent. Ethan killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the rain's relentless drum. He dismounted slowly, positioning himself between Lily and the men, his stance unyielding as weathered oak. "This ends here," he said, voice steady amid the chaos. The leader stepped forward, water cascading from his brimmed hat, a smirk twisting his lips. "Ryder, you picked the wrong stop. Hand over the girl. She's got unfinished business. Walk away and maybe you keep your wheels." Lily's voice trembled from behind Ethan. "He lied to my family. Took my brother for a job that never ended." The words hung heavy, stirring the moral fire in Ethan's chest. These weren't just thugs. They were the corruption he rode against, preying on the desperate, twisting protection into possession. His hand hovered near his vest pocket, where a small recorder hummed faintly, capturing every threat. Not violence, but truth. That was the Iron Vow's way. The men advanced, boots splashing in puddles, but Ethan held his ground, rain mingling with the sweat of resolve. "She's under my protection now. You touch her, and you'll answer to more than me." As if on cue, the distant thunder masked a deeper rumble. Headlights piercing the storm from the horizon, a convoy of bikes slicing through the downpour. His brothers had come, drawn by the unspoken call of loyalty, engines harmonizing like a vow renewed. The leader hesitated, eyes narrowing at the approaching lights. "This ain't over, biker." He signaled retreat, the trucks peeling away into the night, tail lights fading like retreating specters. Ethan exhaled, the tension uncoiling like a spring, and turned to Lily. Her eyes, wide in the flashes of lightning, held a spark of something new, belief perhaps, in the quiet power of a promise fulfilled. They remounted, the convoy catching up in a thunderous wave, leather-clad figures nodding in silent solidarity. The road ahead cleared, but the shadows lingered, a reminder that justice wasn't a single ride, but a chain of choices. As the storm began to break, stars emerging through the clouds, Ethan felt the weight of his scars lighten, just a fraction. Lily's warning had saved him, but in turn his oath would save her, and maybe, in the unraveling web ahead, redeem them both. The engines faded into the rhythm of the rain-soaked night, carrying them toward whatever dawn promised next. The convoy cut through the dissipating storm like a blade through silk, headlights carving paths in the lingering mist that clung to the canyon walls. Ethan's Harley led the pack, its engine a steady pulse amid the chorus of 20-odd bikes, their riders shadows in the night, brothers bound by ink and oath, not blood. Lily pressed against his back, her small frame no longer trembling, though the chill of the rain seeped into her bones. The scent of wet leather and exhaust mingled with the earthy petrichor rising from the desert floor, a reminder that even in chaos, the land endured. They veered off Route 17 onto a forgotten dirt track, the kind that wound through arroyos like veins in the Earth's hidden body. Up ahead, a cluster of low-slung cabins emerged from the gloom, lit by the soft glow of solar lanterns. The Iron Vows outpost, a sanctuary pieced together from salvaged wood and unspoken trust. Ethan eased off the throttle as they rolled to a stop in the gravel courtyard, the engines dying one by one in a fading symphony. Raindrops pattered on tin roofs, a gentle counterpoint to the adrenaline still humming in his veins. Marcus Reed, the convoy's second-in-command, dismounted first, a towering figure with a shaved head and a scar tracing his jaw like a map of old battles. His vest patch gleamed faintly, the iron chain emblem catching the lantern light. "You look like you stirred up a hornet's nest, Ethan," he said, clapping a hand on his shoulder, the gesture warm despite the chill. Marcus had been there from the beginning, a war vet who traded foxholes for handlebars after losing his squad to the same shadows that haunted Ethan. "Who's the passenger?" Ethan helped Lily down, her sneakers sinking into the mud. "This is Lily. She saw something back at that diner, saved my hide before it turned ugly." The girl's eyes darted between the men, wary but curious, as more riders gathered. Javier, the quiet mechanic with hands calloused from fixing more than engines, and Lena, a sharp-eyed nurse who'd patched up their wounds and their souls alike, her braid swinging as she approached with a blanket. Lily wrapped the wool around her shoulders, the fibers rough but comforting, like a hug from a stranger who cared. "They were waiting for him," she murmured, voice gaining strength in the circle of faces. "The mechanic, Carl, his tattoo, the serpent, it's their sign. They take people, make them disappear for the network. My brother, he tried to run their errands, thought it was easy money, but they kept him, said he owed more." Her words trailed off, eyes fixed on the ground, where puddles reflected the stars now peeking through the clouds. The group fell silent, the weight of her story settling like dust after a gale. Ethan nodded to Marcus, who led them inside the main cabin, its door creaking open to reveal a space warmed by a crackling wood stove. The air smelled of pine resin and strong tea brewing on the hearth. They settled around a scarred oak table, maps and faded photos pinned to the walls, reminders of rides past, faces of those they'd pulled from the brink. Lena poured steaming mugs, her movements precise, a quiet anchor in the storm of revelations. As Lily sipped her tea, the warmth chasing the cold from her cheeks, she unfolded her tale further. It started in a dusty border town, where whispers of opportunity lured the desperate. Her brother, Thomas, barely 18, had fallen in with the serpent-marked men, promised work hauling goods across the line, but the loads hid more than cargo, secrets, debts, lives traded like currency. When Thomas questioned it, they vanished him one fog-shrouded morning, leaving Lily with nothing but a crumpled note and the echo of his laughter. She'd run, scraping by on back roads, until the diner became her fragile refuge. Spotting Carl's ink had been like staring into the abyss again, but Ethan's arrival, a lone rider with eyes that held no deceit, had ignited a spark of defiance. Ethan listened, his fingers tracing the iron chain tattoo on his wrist, the ink a vow etched in a hospital room 20 years back. His comrade Jake had gripped his hand as life ebbed, whispering, "Promise me, brother, don't let the world chew up the innocents. Ride for them." Ethan had carried that weight across continents, founding the iron vow to honor it. But lately, the network's tendrils had crept closer, corrupting small towns, ensnaring the lost. Lily's warning wasn't coincidence. It was the promise calling him back, demanding he weave her into the chain. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "We've heard the rumors. Serpent crew running setups from here to the coast. They pose as fixers, lure riders off the main drags, strip 'em of bikes, freedom, worse. But no proof. Just echoes." He glanced at Lily. "You got names? Places?" She hesitated, then nodded, pulling a folded paper from her backpack, a scribbled list, addresses inked in hasty pencil. "Thomas mentioned a warehouse by the old rail yard, outside Redstone. That's where they hold people, make 'em work off debts." The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the stoves pop underscoring the gravity. Redstone was neutral ground, a faded industrial ghost town where laws reach frayed like old rope. Infiltrating it meant risking the fragile peace they'd built. But ignoring it betrayed the oath. Lena placed a hand on Lily's arm, her touch maternal, forged from years mending the club's fractures. "You're brave for speaking up, child. We've lost too many to silence." Her eyes met Ethan's, a silent question. How far would they ride this time? The moral crossroads loomed, storm the shadows with force, or unravel them with the steady light of truth. Ethan felt the pull, the redemption in Lily's gaze, mirroring his own unfinished healing. Jake's promise wasn't just words. It was this, the quiet stand against the tide. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, the desert breathing anew under the moon's silver gaze. The riders murmured plans, voices blending into a tapestry of resolve. Scouts to Redstone at dawn, signals to allies in nearby chapters. Lily watched, the blanket slipping as she straightened, a girl on the cusp of family not born, but chosen. Ethan caught her eye, offering a nod that sealed it. "We get your brother back. That's the vow." As the night deepened, the cabin's lanterns cast long shadows, dancing like guardians on the walls. The serpent's web stretched wide, but the iron vow's chain was unbreakable, link by link reforged in the fire of loyalty. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the cool air brushing his face, carrying the faint promise of sunrise. The road to Redstone awaited, fraught with ethical snares and psychological tempests, but with Lily's warning as their compass. They rode not into darkness, but toward the dawn of justice earned. The engines would roar again soon, carrying the weight of secrets unveiled, and the unyielding honor that bound them all. Dawn broke over the outpost like a reluctant confession, its pale light filtering through the cabin windows in slivers of gold and grey. The desert air carried the crisp bite of morning, mingled with the faint smoke from last night's fire, as the iron vow riders stirred to life. Ethan Hale stood on the porch, nursing a tin mug of black coffee, its steam curling like ghosts in the chill. His eyes traced the horizon where the arroyos twisted toward Redstone, a place that felt more like a scar on the map than a town. Lily's list burned in his pocket, addresses scrawled like accusations, pointing to the heart of the serpent's lair. The weight of her trust pressed on him heavier than the miles he'd ridden, a reminder that promises weren't just words. They were the chains that held a man upright when the world tried to drag him down. Inside, the table was a war room of sorts, maps unrolled under the flicker of a lantern that hadn't been extinguished. Marcus leaned over the paper. his thick finger tracing a route that skirted the main roads, avoiding the eyes of those who might sell them out. Javier tinkered with a radio in the corner, static crackling like distant thunder, tuning into frequencies where allies whispered warnings. Lena moved quietly among them, packing a medkit with bandages and salves, her face set in the quiet determination of someone who'd seen too many wounds that no stitch could mend. Lily sat at the edge, her backpack open, fingers fidgeting with the frayed photo of her brother Thomas. The image was clearer in the morning light, his smile wide, eyes bright with the hope of youth before the shadows claimed him. "We hit the rail yard at dusk," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the murmurs. "Scout first, Javier and me on the flanks. No guns, no noise. We're there for truth, not blood." The words hung in the air, a vow renewed, echoing the club's creed, justice through integrity, not the barrel of a weapon. Ethan nodded, but his mind churned with the ethical knots ahead. Redstone wasn't just a ghost town, it was a nexus of corruption, where local enforcers turned blind eyes for a cut of the network's dealings. Storming in meant risking exposure, drawing the serpent's fangs not just on them, but on innocents caught in the web. Lily's story had peeled back layers, families shattered, debts fabricated to bind the desperate, all under the guise of opportunity. It mirrored the betrayals Ethan had buried from his war days, when comrades vanished into the fog of alliances gone sour. Lily looked up, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Thomas said the warehouse has guards, but they're sloppy after dark. They keep the workers in the back, chained to crates like animals." The room stilled, the imagery evoking a visceral wrongness, the kind that ignited a moral fire in the chest. Ethan knelt beside her, his scarred hand gentle on her knee. "We'll bring him home, but we do it right. No rushing in blind. Your warning got us this far. Now it's our turn to honor that." Her nod was small, but in it bloomed the first real seed of belonging, the realization that these strangers, bound by ink and oath, were weaving her into their unbreakable chain. The convoy assembled under the rising sun, bikes lined like sentinels in the courtyard, engines purring softly as riders checked tires and straps. Lena stayed behind, the outpost her domain, a beacon for any who might flee the coming storm. "Watch each other's backs," she said to Ethan, pressing a small talisman into his palm. A polished stone etched with an iron link, a token from her own losses. "And remember, redemption isn't in the rescue, it's in the why." Her words lingered as he mounted his Harley, Lily secured behind him once more, her arms wrapped tight around his waist. The girl had changed overnight, her fear tempered by purpose, eyes scanning the group with a quiet fierceness. They rolled out in formation, dust rising in lazy plumes behind them, the desert unfolding like a vast canvas of redemption. The track wound through canyons where echoes played tricks, amplifying the rumble of engines into something almost sacred. Hours blurred into a hypnotic rhythm, wind whipping past, the sun climbing to bake the earth, scents of creosote and hot metal filling the air. Ethan led, his thoughts drifting to Jake's final breath, the promise that had birthed the iron vow. This ride wasn't vengeance, it was restitution, a stand against the cynicism that let networks like the Serpent thrive, but doubt gnawed at the edges. What if Tomas was beyond saving, twisted by the very chains meant to hold him? What if their intervention shattered more lives than it mended? By midday, they crested a ridge overlooking Redstone. The town sprawled below like a forgotten dream. Rusted silos piercing the sky, abandoned tracks snaking through weed-choked lots. The rail yard loomed on the outskirts, a labyrinth of shadows even in the light, guarded by chain-link fences sagging under years of neglect. Marcus signaled a halt, the convoy fanning out behind boulders for cover. Binoculars passed hand to hand, revealing glints of movement, figures patrolling the perimeter, serpent tattoos flashing on arms like warnings. Lily pointed to a squat building at the yard's edge. "That's it. The warehouse. I remember the red door." Ethan's pulse quickened, the air thick with tension. Every sense heightened. The distant clang of metal, the faint shouts carried on the breeze, the psychological weight of the choice ahead. Infiltrate now, under the cover of heat haze, or wait for dusk and risk the network's reinforcements. The moral dilemma twisted like a knife. Haste could doom them all, but delay might seal Tomas's fate. Javier's radio hissed to life. A crackled voice from a scout. 2 vans inbound from the east, serpent colors. The trap tightened, not just physical, but a test of their resolve, forcing them to balance loyalty against the greater good. As the sun beat down mercilessly, baking the rocks into ovens, Ethan gathered the group in a tight circle. "We adapt. Split into pairs. Watch, listen, gather proof. No one moves without the signal." Lily's eyes met his, fierce with unspoken thanks, her warning from the diner now the spark that lit this fire. The iron vow wasn't built on brute force, but on the quiet power of standing firm, link by unyielding link. In the shimmering heat as the van's dust clouds approached, Ethan felt the promise stir deeper, a redemption not just for Lily, but for the scars he carried. The day stretched taut, suspense coiling like a spring, the ethical storm brewing as fierce as any desert gale. Redstone waited, its secrets festering, but the rider's honor burned brighter, ready to pierce the veil. If this tale of quiet courage has touched you, smash that like button below. It helps spread these stories of unbreakable promises to those who need them most. The heat haze over Redstone warped the air like a fever dream, turning the rail yard into a mirage of rusted metal and forgotten freight cars that squatted like ancient beasts under the relentless sun. Ethan Hale crouched behind a weathered boulder on the ridge, his leather vest sticking to his skin, the faint tang of sweat and gun oil from Javier's radio mingling with the dry, acrid scent of sun-baked rail ties below. The vans had arrived, disgorging more serpent-marked figures who fanned out like smoke from a dying fire, their movements efficient, predatory. Lily pressed close to his side, her breath shallow, eyes fixed on the red door of the warehouse, a splash of faded crimson against the grey sprawl, mocking the hope it once represented. "They're doubling the watch," Marcus whispered from his vantage, binoculars pressed to his eyes, the lenses glinting like distant stars. His voice carried the gravel of caution, honed from too many close calls where haste had cost lives. The group had split as planned, Javier and 2 others slipping toward the eastern fence for a closer listen, while Ethan, Marcus and Lily held the high ground, hearts pounding in sync with the distant clank of chains echoing from the yard. No one spoke of the ethical tightrope they walked. Entering Redstone uninvited could shatter the fragile truce with local watchmen, turning guardians into outlaws in the eyes of a system already bent by corruption. But Lily's list, clutched in Ethan's fist, was a moral compass, pointing to the human cost of inaction, souls bartered like scrap metal. Lily shifted, her sneakers grinding softly against the gravel, the photo of Tomas tucked safely in her pocket like a talisman. He'd whistle when he came home. 3 short notes. "Like a bird calling its mate," she murmured, the memory a fragile thread pulling her forward. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, feeling the tremor there, an echo of his own buried doubts. Jake's promise had always been clear in the abstract. Protect the lost. But here in the sweltering limbo of waiting, it fractured into choices. Expose the network and risk drawing their venom on innocence, or pull back and let the shadows swallow another family. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth until mirages danced, blurring the line between resolve and illusion. Javier's voice crackled over the radio, low and urgent. "Perimeters thin on the south side. Gap in the fence big enough for a bike if we walk it in." Heard voices inside. "It sounds like bargaining, not threats, but the air stinks of fear." Ethan acknowledged with a click, the static fading into the hum of cicadas that rose like a shroud over the yard. He glanced at Marcus, whose scarred jaw tightened in the light. "We move now or lose the window. Dusk will bring more vans, reinforcements from the network's core." The decision hung heavy, a psychological gauntlet. Faith in Lily's intel versus the peril of the unknown, where one wrong step could unravel the Iron Vow's creed of quiet justice. With a nod that sealed their path, Ethan led the descent, the group weaving through scrub brush that clawed at their boots like reluctant warnings. Lily stayed glued to his side, her small frame a silent testament to the stakes, the redemption she sought not just for Thomas, but for the girl she'd become in his absence, hardened yet unbroken. The fence loomed, its chain link sagging under vines that whispered against the wind, and they slipped through the gap, hearts thundering louder than the engines left hidden on the ridge. The yard unfolded around them, towering stacks of crates casting jagged shadows, the ground littered with shards of glass that crunched softly underfoot, each step a prayer against detection. They hugged the walls of derelict cars, the metal hot to the touch, radiating the day's fury. Distant voices filtered through the warehouse walls, gruff tones haggling over shipments, laced with the undercurrent of coercion that twisted Ethan's gut. It evoked flashes of his war days, foxholes where loyalty was the only currency and betrayal the deadliest debt. Marcus signaled a halt near a loading dock, where a side door hung ajar, spilling dim light and the muffled clink of metal on concrete. Lily's eyes widened, recognition flickering like a struck match. That's the sound. The chains they use for the workers. Ethan peered inside, the air thick with the musty odor of damp wood and stale sweat, his vision adjusting to the gloom. Figures moved in the half-light. 2 guards lounging by crates, serpent tattoos coiling on their arms as they lit cigarettes, the smoke curling lazily toward the rafters. Beyond them, in the shadowed back, shapes huddled, silhouettes chained to posts, heads bowed in exhaustion. No cries, no overt signs of aggression, just the quiet erosion of spirits, a poetic injustice that burned hotter than the desert sun. One figure stirred, whistling faintly. 3 short notes, barely audible, but to Lily it was thunder. "Thomas!" she breathed, lunging forward, but Ethan's arm barred her gently, his grip firm with the weight of strategy. "Not yet. We need proof, something to bind them in their own web." He pulled the recorder from his vest, its lens capturing the scene in silent witness. The guards' casual cruelty, the workers' chained forms suggesting captivity without the graphic scars of brutality. Marcus flanked him, eyes scanning for exits, the ethical tension coiling tighter. Free them now and spark a fight that could spill blood, or document and dismantle, honoring the vow through truth over force. A guard's head snapped up, cigarette dropping as he sniffed the air like a hound. "You hear that? Like rats in the walls." Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate, the door creaking wider. Ethan's pulse surged, the moment teetering on the knife's edge of confrontation. Lily froze, her warning from the diner now a living echo, saving not just him, but this fragile incursion. Marcus whispered, "Back out, regroup." But the guard emerged, eyes narrowing on the shadows where they hid. In that suspended breath, Ethan stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace, voice steady as iron. "We're not here for trouble. Just answers, for a boy named Thomas." The guard's hand twitched toward his belt, but surprise flickered in his eyes, buying them seconds. Lily's whistle mimicked her brother's, soft and calling, drawing a murmur from within. The warehouse stirred, chains rattling like awakening ghosts, the moral storm breaking as loyalty clashed with corruption. Ethan felt the promise ignite fully, a chain linking past scars to this present stand, redemption unfolding not in victory, but in the unyielding choice to protect. The guard lunged, but Marcus was faster, tackling him silently into the dust, binding his wrists with zip ties from his pocket. No harm, just restraint, the iron vow's way. Alarms blared faintly in the distance, the network's web vibrating with intrusion, but the riders moved as one, slipping inside to the huddled forms. Tomas emerged from the gloom, chains clinking as Javier worked the locks, his face gaunt, but eyes lighting with disbelief at Lily's approach. "Sis, how?" The reunion was wordless, an embrace heavy with unspoken oaths, tears mingling with the warehouse's dust. But freedom came at a cost. The van's engines roared to life outside, headlights sweeping the yard like searchlights. Ethan gathered the group, workers freed in hushed urgency, the air electric with suspense. "Ride with us," he urged, the ethical victory bittersweet, knowing the network's retaliation loomed. As they burst into the fading light, bikes summoned from the ridge. The convoy formed anew, engines thundering defiance. Redstone receded behind them, its secrets pierced but not slain, the road ahead a gauntlet of pursuit and conscience. Lily clung to Thomas now, her warning the spark that forged this family from fire, Ethan's scars easing in the wind's caress, the promise alive in every mile. The engines of the Iron Vow bikes roared into the twilight like a chorus of defiant thunder, kicking up clouds of red dust that swirled in the wake of their escape from Redstone's rail yard. Ethan Hale leaned low over his Harley, the wind whipping at his face with a sharp bite of cooling air, carrying the metallic tang of exhaust and the faint, acrid residue of the warehouse's gloom. Lily and Thomas clung to the passenger seat behind him, brother and sister reunited in a tangle of arms and whispered relief, their breaths ragged against the storm of motion. The freed workers, 5 shadowed figures, gaunt and wide-eyed, were distributed among the convoy, perched on rear seats or saddlebags, their chains discarded like shed skins back in the yard. No one spoke. The only dialogue was the urgent growl of throttles and the distant wail of alarms fading into the canyon's embrace. Marcus Reed rode flank on Ethan's left, his massive frame cutting through the wind like a bulwark, eyes scanning the mirrors for the serpent's pursuit. The vans had mobilized swiftly, their headlights now piercing the dusk like accusatory fingers, gaining ground on the straightaway that snaked out of the ghost town. Javier brought up the rear with 2 others, weaving protective patterns to shield the vulnerable cargo. These souls who'd been bartered into silence, their debts fabricated from desperation. The desert unfolded around them in a blur of sagebrush and jagged rock faces, the sun's last embers painting the sky in strokes of crimson and indigo, as if the horizon itself bled with the moral urgency of their flight. Ethan's mind raced ahead, the weight of Jake's promise pressing like an invisible passenger. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning, testing the unbreakable chain of loyalty against the serpent's venomous grasp. The lead van surged closer, its grille a snarling maw in the gathering dark, bumping the tail of a trailing bike with a jolt that sent vibrations rattling through the formation. A worker, a wiry man named Samuel, his face etched with the quiet terror of months in chains, yelped, gripping Javier's waist tighter. "They're not stopping," Ethan shouted over the din, his voice gravelly, laced with the ethical fire that burned hotter than fear. To fight back now meant risking the innocents they'd sworn to save, turning guardians into the very predators they hunted. But surrender wasn't in the vow. It was a slow poison, eroding the honor that bound them. Lily's hand squeezed Ethan's side, her whisper cutting through the roar. Thomas saw their leader, Victor, the one with the serpent on his neck. He runs the debts, twists promises into cages. The words ignited a deeper resolve, her initial warning from the diner evolving into this symphony of redemption, where one girl's courage unraveled a web of corruption. The convoy veered onto a narrow side trail, tires crunching over gravel that gave way to packed earth. the path hugging a sheer cliff where the drop-off yawned black and endless below. Moonlight filtered through scudding clouds, casting silvery highlights on the riders' leathers, the iron chain patches glinting like badges of unyielding truth. Marcus signaled with a gloved fist, directing the group into a tighter wedge to confound the pursuers. The vans faltered on the rough terrain, engines straining against the uneven ground, but one broke free, ramming forward with reckless intent. Headlights swept wildly, illuminating flashes of faces, serpent tattoos twisting in the light, symbols of a cycle that fed on broken oaths. Ethan felt the psychological strain coil in his chest, a tempest of doubt. Had their infiltration doomed these workers to worse reprisals, painting targets on families left behind? Or was this the poetic justice, exposing the network's rot to the light of consequence? A sharp curve loomed, the trail narrowing to a razor's edge, forcing the van to brake hard, tires screeching in protest. Ethan gunned his throttle, pulling ahead, the Harley's frame vibrating with raw power as the wind tore at his beard. Carrying the clean scent of night-blooming creosote, a fragile beauty amid the chase. Thomas leaned forward, his voice hoarse but fierce. "They'll hit the riverbed up ahead. It's a trap, shallow but quicksand soft after rains." The warning echoed Lily's own, a thread of family intuition weaving into the Iron Vows tapestry. Ethan relayed it with a hand signal, the convoy splintering briefly to flank the hazard. The van plunged in regardless, its undercarriage grinding to a halt in the deceptive mud, doors slamming open as figures spilled out, shouting curses that dissolved into the night's vastness. But the pursuit wasn't broken. A second van crested the rise behind, more relentless, its horn blaring like a wounded beast. The riders pushed on, the trail opening into a flat expanse where distant lights twinkled, the outpost's lanterns, a beacon of sanctuary drawing them home. Ethan's scars itched under his shirt, reminders of battles where loyalty had been the only armor and betrayal the sharpest blade. This ride mirrored those ghosts, forcing him to confront the redemption he'd chased across endless miles, not in erasing the past, but in forging a legacy of quiet stands. Lily's presence behind him, now shared with her brother, grounded that truth. Her tattoo-spotting vigilance had sparked this chain reaction, saving not just him from the diner's setup, but pulling Tomas from the abyss, mending a family's fracture with the club's unyielding honor. As the outpost came into view, its cabins huddled like steadfast allies against the dark. Marcus fired a flare from his saddlebag, a brilliant arc that lit the sky, summoning Lena and the reserves waiting within. The van faltered at the sight, peeling off into the shadows, its taillights winking out like retreating lies. The convoy rolled into the courtyard, engines sputtering to silence one by one, the air thick with the mingled scents of hot metal, sweat-soaked leather, and the profound relief of lives reclaimed. Samuel and the others dismounted shakily, eyes wide with the dawning realization of freedom, while Thomas pulled Lily into a fierce hug, their silhouettes framed by the lantern glow. Ethan swung off his bike, boots hitting gravel with a solid thud, and faced the group, his breath steadying in the cool night air. "We got them out, but the serpent's wounded, not dead. They'll come for retribution. Twist this into their narrative of thieves in the night." Marcus nodded, clapping shoulders in silent solidarity, the moral weight settling like dew on the dawn. Inside the main cabin, voices rose in hushed plans, safe houses for the workers, signals to allied chapters to tighten the net around Victor's operations. Lily met Ethan's gaze, her eyes no longer shadowed by solitary fear, but alight with the strength of chosen kin. "You kept your word," she said softly, the simple truth a balm on his scars. Yet as the stars wheeled overhead, the outpost's peace felt tenuous, a brief respite in the ethical odyssey. Whispers from Javier's radio hinted at movement in Redstone, network reinforcements massing, perhaps setting a larger trap to reclaim their debts. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the wooden planks creaking underfoot, and inhaled the night's quiet promise, sage and stone, unbroken horizons. The ride to justice wasn't over. It demanded one more stand, where loyalty would clash with the full fury of corruption, testing the iron vow's chain to its limits. In the hush before the next storm, with Lily and Thomas safe within, Ethan felt the redemption deepen, not a solitary heal, but a shared forging. Link by enduring link, the engines would thunder again at first light, carrying them into the heart of the reckoning. First light crept over the outpost like a hesitant ally, painting the cabins in soft hues of amber and rose, the desert awakening with the subtle crunch of frost underfoot, and the distant call of a lone coyote fading into silence. Ethan Hale stood at the edge of the courtyard, his breath visible in the crisp air, mingling with the faint aroma of brewing coffee from the main cabin. The Iron Vow riders moved with purposeful quiet, checking engines, loading supplies into saddlebags, their faces etched with the resolve of men and women who knew dawn brought not just renewal, but the sharp edge of confrontation. Lily and Thomas sat on the porch steps, sharing a blanket, her head on his shoulder, the reunion's warmth a fragile shield against the chill. The workers they'd freed huddled nearby, nursing mugs of hot broth, their eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and lingering shadows from the warehouse's grip. Marcus approached Ethan, his boots thudding softly on the gravel, a rolled map tucked under his arm. Scouts confirm it. Victor's holed up in the old mill on Redstone's north end, rallying his crew. They've got the local watch in their pocket, spinning tales of us as raiders to justify a manhunt. His voice was steady, but the scar on his jaw tightened, a reminder of past reckonings where loyalty had been tested in fire. Ethan nodded, his fingers absently tracing the iron chain tattoo on his wrist, Jake's promise pulsing like a second heartbeat. This final stand wasn't about storming gates. It was the moral climax, unraveling the serpent's lies with the unyielding truth of their bond. Lily's warning had ignited it all, transforming a diner's trap into this odyssey of redemption, where chosen family forged strength from scars. Lena emerged from the cabin, her braid neat despite the hour, pressing small pouches of herbs into the rider's hands, remedies for wounds seen and unseen. "End it clean," she said to Ethan, her eyes holding his with the quiet ferocity of a healer who'd buried too many. "The network thrives on fear. Starve it with light." Thomas stood, pulling Lily to her feet, his frame still lean from captivity, but his gaze fierce. "I'm coming," he insisted, voice rough with determination. "They twisted my choices, made me haul their lies. I need to face Victor, break the cycle myself." Lily squeezed his hand, her own warning from the mechanic's tattoo now echoed in his resolve, a sibling pact woven into the Iron Vow's chain. Ethan hesitated, the ethical weight pressing. Include him and risk shattering the boy further, or shield him and deny his redemption. In the end, trust won. The promise demanded it. The convoy assembled under the strengthening sun, bikes gleaming with dew-kissed chrome, engines coughing to life in a low, anticipatory rumble that vibrated through the earth. 20 strong now, swelled by reserves from allied outposts, they rolled out in a tight phalanx, dust trailing like a banner of defiance. The road to Redstone wound through arroyos where morning shadows played across canyon walls, the air alive with the scent of blooming yucca and sun-warmed stone. Ethan led Lily and Thomas behind him once more, the wind carrying whispers of sage that eased the tension coiling in his chest. Hours melted into a meditative blur, the psychological suspense building like thunderheads on the horizon, visions of Victor's smirk, the serpent tattoo coiling like deceit itself. testing every vow Ethan had sworn. Redstone appeared mid-morning, its skeletal structures bathed in harsh light, the old mill rising like a decayed sentinel on the outskirts, its silos pitted by time and neglect. They parked the bikes in a concealed gulch, approaching on foot through scrub that scratched at their legs like doubting fingers. The mill's yard buzzed with activity. Serpent-marked enforcers patrolling chain-link barriers, vans idling with ominous purrs, Victor's silhouette pacing a raised platform, his neck tattoo stark against his collar. Shouts echoed, laced with the corruption's false authority, accusations of theft, demands for the workers' return, all to mask their own web of fabricated debts. Ethan signaled the split. Half the group to flank the perimeter, drawing eyes with feigned distractions, while he, Marcus, Javier, and a core few, including Thomas, slipped toward the main entrance. The air grew thick with the musty odor of rust and oil as they neared, hearts pounding in rhythm with the distant clank of machinery long silent. Thomas froze at the fence's edge, eyes locking on Victor, the man who'd lured him with promises of easy pay, only to chain him in a cycle of servitude. He said it was temporary, Thomas whispered, voice cracking with the raw ache of betrayal. Lily's hand found his, her initial sighting of the tattoo, now the anchor pulling him through. Ethan's mind flashed to Jake's foxhole, the dying whisper that birthed this life on the road. Protect, not destroy. They breached the fence with wire cutters moving like shadows, the moral tension taut as a bowstring. Confront Victor with evidence from the recorder, expose his network to the watching locals, or let silence swallow the truth. Inside the mill's cavernous interior, dust motes danced in shafts of light piercing cracked windows, the floor littered with crates that hid more than goods. Victor turned as they emerged, his smirk fading into a snarl at the sight of Thomas. "You? Back for more debts?" His voice slithered, but Ethan stepped forward, recorder raised like a shield, its playback spilling accusations into the air. Guards' threats, workers' testimonies, the serpent's grip laid bare. The enforcers hesitated, murmurs rippling through the yard as locals gathered at the gates. Drawn by the unfolding drama, no fists flew, the justice was poetic, truth's blade cutting deeper than steel, Victor's empire crumbling under the weight of exposed lies. Victor lunged, but Marcus intercepted, pinning him without a blow, the serpent tattoo twisting futilely. "It's over," Ethan said, voice resonant in the echoing space. "Your cycles end here, not with chains, but choice." Thomas faced his captor, voice steady. "You twisted my promise to my family, now I break yours." The workers they'd freed stepped forward from the shadows, their presence a chorus of reclaimed lives, tipping the scales as the local watch, once blind, witnessed the rot. Victor's crew scattered, the network's venom dispersed by the light of integrity, no bodies left, just echoes of a vow fulfilled. As the sun crested high, the mill emptied of darkness, the iron vow riders escorting the humbled enforcers to face neutral arbiters, fictional codes of moral reckoning that bound without bars. Lily and Thomas walked side by side, her warning the spark that ignited this dawn, their family whole again, woven into the club's enduring chain. Ethan mounted his Harley last, the engines rumble a song of quiet triumph, scars lighter under the warmth of redemption earned. The road stretched open, promises kept forging paths ahead, where loyalty outlasted every shadow. Thank you for riding this journey with us, from a girl's sharp eyes to unbreakable bonds. If these tales of honor and heart resonate, hit that subscribe button and join the Iron Vow family. More stories of quiet courage await on the horizon.